everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. As you're filtering in, I'm going to ask that you throw your first name, your preferred pronouns, and also what city or DSA chapter you're representing tonight. Throw that in the chat box. We're going to give it a couple minutes to let folks join us for this really exciting conversation that we're going to have. So yes, make sure, drop your name, preferred pronouns, what city or DSA chapter you're representing tonight. And yeah, we're going to get started in a couple of minutes. Just a little bit about me, since I'm going to be your moderator / MC for tonight. I am Robin Wonsley, and I have the honor of serving some really awesome people here in Minneapolis as the city's first Black independent Democratic Socialist city council member. And I'm super, super excited to be able to talk to this amazing group of folks that you're going to hear from tonight. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into that in a couple minutes, but just make sure, folks, oh no, the chat is disabled so people can shout out where they're from. I'm already seeing somebody from the Twin Cities. Thank you for showing up. Jerry, Chicago. While Minneapolis might be home right now, like Chicago is forever home, I'm Chi-Town like all the way through. So I'm super excited to see. We have our Chicago folks. Okay, I'm seeing y'all are getting the chats populating. I'm loving the energy through this Zoom chat here, y'all. So just again, make sure you drop your name, pronouns, and what city you repping tonight. So as we're doing that, I do want to, just go through a couple just like ground rules to really, structure our time tonight. So I do want to note, we do have captions available for this webinar, and you should see the CC/closed captioning button on your screen. If you don't, please hop in the chat and, click host and panelists and like send us a note, and we can, direct you to where you need to be in order to see that. I also want to share, this is a camaraderie space. So, most of our conversation with each other tonight, well, I should say amongst y'all who are watching, is going to take place in the chat box. So I just ask, just be respectful. That's really like the main ground rule. And if there is discourteous, uncomradely behavior that we see in the chat box, just know you're going to get kicked out or be removed from the webinar. So just keep it real respectful. We're here to learn from each other and just like really have a nice vibe with each other. Socialists, we like to vibe with each other. Like, let's just keep it there. Again, keep sharing your name, where you're representing. And I'm really, really glad that we all have this night ahead of us. So that said, I do want to just do some quick framing for the event. Once again, Councilmember Robin Wonsley here representing Minneapolis, but Chi-Town till I die. Like, we're going to keep it there. And I'm going to be your moderator for tonight's discussion. Some of you might be aware, if you read like the description for the event, that this is the third and final event of this year in the DSA Fund series on How We Win, which has explored how local DSA organizers and public officials are working to win policy change all across the U.S. In the case of tonight's conversation, we're going to be able to take a deeper dive and hear about the inspiring policy work and efforts and fights that both socialist elected leaders and organizers and activists are advancing, specifically in Philadelphia and Minneapolis, Ithaca, and New York. So it's our hopes that tonight's conversation can really offer all of you all just a plethora of lessons, insights, and strategies on how we as socialists can advance and achieve, tangible wins that support our economic and social goals of bettering society, but also most importantly, like goals that ultimately not only centers, uplifts, but also ensure working class people know that they can govern and run society, as opposed to the trifling Elon Musk of the world. So all that to say, I do want to take opportunity to really talk a little bit about like who our amazing panelists are. As I mentioned, I already did me twice, so we can just bypass that one. But the first panelist that I'm going to introduce, and this is my brother, I get to work with him every single day, and I'm super excited that he's here tonight. Councilmember Jason Chavez. Councilmember Chavez is the first LGBT plus Latinx council member to serve in Minneapolis, and is also a proud member of Twin Cities Democratic Socialists of America. I am too, whoop, whoop. DSA, we see you. And prior to Councilmember Chavez's service as a city council member, he played a critical role in passing the 2020 Police Accountability Act in Minnesota and the 2021 Omnibus Employment and Economic Development Bill in Minnesota as a committee legislative aide at the Minnesota House of Representatives. We thank you so much, Councilmember Chavez. I hope you're giving like the parade wave to people. Next on our lineup here is Mike D. Mike is the co-chair of the Philly DSA and sits on the chapter Socialists and Office Commission and Electoral and Political Education Committees. Previously, they served as a campaign manager for DSA member and 2021 Jersey City Council candidate Joelle Brooks. Thank you so much, Mike, for joining us. Give the princess wave to the folks too. Next, we have alderperson Jorge DiFendini. I really hope I got that right. They are a DSA member, Boa Quad, socialist organizer, and alderperson serving on the Ithaca Common Council. They have organized within Ithaca's DSA chapter and the Ithaca's tenant union for campaigns such as Good Cause Eviction and Free Mass Transit campaigns. So thank you so much, alderperson Jorge, for joining us. And last but certainly not least, we have oh my God, I am so sorry. Jeannie, please help me. Genevieve, thank you. Yeah. We have Genevieve Rand, who is a member of Ithaca's DSA and is a co-chair of the Tompkins County Working Families Party. And following years of volunteer work at the Ithaca Tennis Union, first organizing around cancel rent and good cause campaigns, they recently worked on supporting the Ithaca Solidarity Slate, which is a collaborative project between the Ithaca DSA chapter and Ithaca Tenants Union. So round of applause, y'all, from the chat box to all of our dynamic panelists who are speaking tonight. And then next, I just want to overview our agenda for tonight's conversation. So the first half, about first 30 minutes, the discussion will really center on questions, prep questions that I'm going to be, dishing out to our esteemed panelists. And then the second half, you'll get a chance to answer burning questions that you have yourself through a Q&A portion, which you can submit your questions by using the Q&A button on your screen to submit your questions. And I promise you, I will do my very, very best to get through all of the questions that I know many of you will submit. So that said, you can stop hearing me talk. You came here to hear for the panelists. So we can dive into the first set of questions. So first question. The organizing challenges that we face as democratic socialists, we know they look very different across the country. And each of the places that you all, work, play, live in, they're responding to a different set of climates and policy pushes and policy goals. And I would love for our panelists to talk about some of the specific challenges and opportunities you're facing around advancing some critical policy work that you are either leading in tangent with social movements on the ground, or that social movements on the ground are really pressing for in your respective cities. So could you share some of those specific challenges and opportunities? And, I will start off with Genevieve to kick us off with that response.
Yeah, somebody said in the chat that they can't see us. Can people see us? Just respond in the chat if you can see us. I just want to make sure. Okay, people can see us. Um, so yeah, through my work, I'm in a little bit of a unique position in some ways because I live in a mid-rural, mid-urban upstate New York area, but I also work with more rural areas around the state. I also work with more urban areas like New York City. So there's a lot of different environments with a lot of different levels of development of like DSA and other socialist organizing. And I think that no matter where we are, the spot that we're in right now as a movement is that we're in the minority. And when we're entering legislatures, we're entering as a minority. And so in any environment that we do that, we have to do it with a razor sharp power analysis, but also not a lot of like inertia. And so in every single environment, we have to very carefully analyze what are the avenues of power, like what is the strategic place that we can focus our organizing energy that we do have to influence as much as we possibly can. That takes really different shapes in really different areas. In Ithaca, where we live, for example, it's a relatively like blue area election-wise. It's pretty progressive, but there's not a lot of like sort of shoulders to stand on movement wise. And so the things that we've had to build coalitionally and within DSA are we've had to build it while we're flying. And that is probably something that resonates with other people here because we've had this huge surge in our movement in the past 10 years that we're really lucky to be building. But I think that the biggest challenge that we face is that like organizing in the minority and having to have that like very, very disciplined, researched, practiced like power analysis. And the number one thing that helps is us like helping each other together in the places that we live, but then also having a national network to stand in solidarity with each other, both at like the state, I guess, and national level to like work in solidarity with each other, teach each other these skills of like running campaigns, writing legislation, getting in the news, managing your like coalition and the relationships within there. There's so many skills that go into this that we, haven't as a movement had decades to develop from a real like position of cultural presence and power. Yeah.
I was going to say, Genevieve, I wanted to intervene because I was like, you over here answering like the next 4 questions. I was like, hold on, wait, save a little bit. Thank you for emphasizing the piece of how do we do this work being in a political minority. And I'm going to pick on the elected representatives next. I'm also specifically looking at my brother, Councilmember Chavez. One of the political climates that I know many of us are operating in is also under governmental systems that essentially disempower working class organizing and advocacy. Right now in Minneapolis, as part of the backlash to the revolutionary event that happened in 2020 following George Floyd's public execution by Minneapolis police. One of the ways in which the status quo responded to that was consolidating power amongst the most wealthiest contingencies and fractures in Minneapolis through a thing called government structure, or making Minneapolis a strong mayor or mayoral city. And I believe also Alderperson Jorge, you're probably operating in a similar political climate. I know, Councilmember Chavez and we both got elected into a council where we are the minority. So I would love to hear, again, like as you're working on the ground side by side by, movements, the coalitions that Genevieve, named to advance some critical like social policy issues. How has that been impacted by these like inherently anti-democratic governmental structures like strong mayor? How has that impacted your work and moving that type of grassroots organizing forward around policy changes? So I'll start with Councilmember Chavez and then Alderperson Jorge, if you would like to get in, we could go that way.
Thank you, Councilmember Walmsley, and hi everyone again. Jason Chavez, Councilmember of the 9th Ward, Ponce, he, him, and proud member of Twin Cities DSA. So one, just thank you for that question, Councilmember. I'll start with the challenges. Minneapolis residents voted for this new government structure back in November of 2021 that would change our government system from what I would have preferred to a strong mayor and legislative council. And for perspective, in my ward, 63% of my constituents voted against it, while 37% of it supported it. And Ward 9 is the most diverse ward in the city of Minneapolis. So people of color and immigrants knew that this new government structure was going to take power away from them and hand it over to the wealthy in Minneapolis. They share those concerns that wealthier people were going to have more power. And indeed, that is what is happening right now. So we ended up seeing the ballot breakdown with the wealthier being able to carry this initiative forward, even though it was a very close ballot initiative. And what ended up happening when Councilmember Wansley, myself, and a whole bunch of others began the year, a lot of our own staff were telling us that we couldn't meet with them because this new government structure told us that we couldn't meet with our professional staff. So it meant that there was a wall between us as policymakers and staff to be able to carry the people's work in Minneapolis. And it made our job very difficult right in January. But for the first time ever, you saw history happen in Minneapolis. We elected 3, not 1, 3, right? We could have done 1, but we elected Councilmember Wansley, Councilmember Chartai, and myself, 3 DSA members to the Minneapolis City Council. And it has just changed the way we do, I would say, governing in Minneapolis, because for the first time ever, in my opinion, I think we gave voice to people. We've been working really hard to turn people's ideas. And when people come protest at the chambers for all the right reasons, we take those voices and we use our power to try to turn those into policy, into amendments, into changing the way we do our government in the city of Minneapolis. I know that we are fighting for the strongest rent control policy here in Minneapolis. All 3 of us are. We've been pushing back against the police state. We've been doing what we can to redirect these funds into actual community initiatives that we all actually deserve. So I think it shows that when people work really hard to elect, Democratic Socialists into government, you'll see the benefit of that, of us trying to do our best to bring the people's voice to the people's hall. So yeah, thank you.
Bro, that should be a t-shirt. I'm just gonna trademark it now before DSA does. From what did you say, Councilmember Chavez? From the people's
I don't even know, but we should watch the
recording. It's recorded, so we're gonna people.
It came from the heart.
I love that. Yes. Alderperson Defendini, would you like to share kind of how you're operating in similar political climates as you're trying to work in tangent with the social movements on the ground around critical policy issues?
Yeah, most definitely. So I'll start with the challenges so that we can end on a high note. But yeah, the biggest glaring challenge I would say that we have here in Ithaca is something that Genevieve alluded to, which is that we don't have institutional history or foundations really for socialists to govern with. And so for the fact of the matter is, when we get inside council and we get inside electoral politics, we're really building the tracks as we're riding the train. And that can be really challenging and really scary. Ithaca is known as one of the few cities that at one point did have a socialist mayor, Ben Nichols, who did amazing, great things, but that was literally a different century ago. So a lot of that doesn't transfer over here. And so we are really, I like to think that all of us involved in this project are really trailblazers and doing a lot of that foundational work that we're hoping can last, for many generations after we're gone. I mean, my philosophy with the other folks on the Solidarity slate is that we want to be able to put folks in and then take them out as we are, moving forward. It's about the policies and the movement and not the personalities. And so that's where we want to get to at that specific point. So I think that's the major challenge that we are facing. And the other part that I would say is the fact that we are a smaller city is that unlike places like New York City or Philadelphia, we don't really have staff. And the staff that individual council members don't have staff. We don't have folks that we can rely on for things like policy development, things like that. We have to refer to the greater city staff, which I will get into at the later question regarding how we deal with that, which has its challenges for sure. And so we have to find ways where we can get that institutional knowledge and support that normally city councilors can get from their staff at other places. I think for us personally, WFP has been an amazing resource. Our comrades at DSA and national and state have been phenomenal. All these great folks who are filling in these gaps that we don't have because, again, that institutional foundation isn't there. And then last thing, I know there was reference to the mayoral system, and we really do. We had, I will say, a strong mayoral system. Our city just voted on a referendum for a city manager position that will be taking effect not next year, but the year after that. So we're going to be moving away from the strong executive to hopefully an opportunity where the legislature will have more power. But we have to sort of toe that line between, having a CEO of the city who isn't elected and the actual people who are elected. But yeah, that's led to a lot of problems that we've had governing, where our mayor in particular currently, who's an acting mayor, has been really centralizing a whole lot of power. They've been the executive while being an acting legislator and an acting chair of one of our two committees for planning and development. And so that's a whole lot of power centralized in the executive. And so we're really playing with a stacked board against us. And so that's something that we have to deal with. And the other part to that is the other progressives, because as Jen mentioned, we do have a progressive city here in Ithaca. We have a bunch of social democrats and progressive liberals on council, and that's really good for trying to advance policies. But where we've run into issues is that they have, as you can see, Jen, going like this, they have a different philosophy and strategy for how we actually implement them. So we get into those meetings, we're like, yes, we definitely support good cause. Yes, we definitely support, free and expanded transit. But when it comes down to actually trying to implement it, they want to go a more technocratic, like good policy route where we want to mass mobilize the people. And so that's where we sort of butt heads, and maintaining and towing the line between that alliance is definitely something that we have to keep in track. And really briefly, I don't want to talk forever. I'll end on a high note with opportunities. As was mentioned, Ithaca is a very progressive city, and so they have a lot of what I would call fair weather socialists, folks who probably don't think of themselves as socialists, but if we were really successful in advancing those policies as we are, they'll, not bat an eye at it. They'll be like, okay, we're doing this now. This is really cool stuff. And so that's an opportunity that we have here in the city to capitalize on, with it being a more, left of center voting population. And then when I came into office, an opportunity that we had there was that, folks were resigning en masse. Like city council used to really be, an old boys club where there were a bunch of folks who'd been on there for years and years and years. And then finally they got older and retired, and left some vacuums, and we were able to fill them. And in particular, having the ward that I represent is College Town and part of West Campus of Cornell University. That's a really strong student population. The city of Ithaca is a 75% renter city. In that ward, it's 95% renter. So running on a pro-renter, pro-housing justice policy was really, really successful and resonated with a lot of folks. And I think is going to resonate in the coming years to come. And then lastly, housing justice, tenant rights, and labor is on the rise here in Ithaca, and we're really seeing some great stuff with our Starbucks, with public sector workers, and the tenants who are really starting to advocate for themselves. So there's a lot of opportunities amidst the challenges we have.
Thank you so much, Alderperson Ifedini. One of the things that you share kind of go into this next question that I think is really imperative and highlighting how do we actually advance working class struggle around, like we say policy, but policy is really the expression of like the material conditions that working class people are constantly dealing with under this trash system of racial capitalism. But in that, as folks that have inserted themselves into the belly of the beast, these political systems, you name that a focal point of this work should be the policy and the movements. Policies and the movements, not the person. And all of you name that the work that you're doing that side by side with working class movements, grassroots coalitions on the ground. And I'm so glad that you emphasize that. And just thinking of this, and this first question I'm throwing it your way, Mike, is, this component of with having socialists in office, or being socialists, organizers in the community, how do we go about this task of building up or strengthening our coalitions to really make influential policy changes that create those material conditions that are much more equitable, much more empowering to the needs and interests of working class people. So I would love to hear, especially Mike, as someone who has helped create an infrastructure to hold socialists accountable that you all put into office, like what has that coalition work been on the outside of your political city hall and within? And then after you share it, I'll pass it to one of our other panelists to get their thoughts on too.
Yeah, thanks so much. What I'll say is that, just as a caveat for all of this, we are very much in the beginning of this. The resolution to create our SIO passed in July, and we're going to have our first call, I think, in about 5 days. So I'll just sort of talk about the experience of, what led us to this and what we're sort of going through right now, which is that, where we are right now, we've done a lot of the work of coalition building and, setting up individual pieces and, individual powerful people without sort of realizing it or without being self-conscious about it. Philadelphia is a tremendously progressive city. Certainly a lot of what Jorge said about Ithaca and what Genevieve said about Ithaca really resonated with me. In that, there are a lot of people who fundamentally you can work with in city government. Interestingly, a public bank bill passed here, the first one in the country, run by a very, very middle of the road business-oriented counselor. And then it stalled out with the mayor. So that's sort of a picture of city politics in a nutshell. But we found ourselves in this place with legislators who are socialists in both city council, Kendra Brooks, hopefully soon to be joined by a couple of other people, and a set of 3 in Harrisburg. But that network hadn't really come together. And so where this really started was a couple of years ago when Senator Nikhil Saval first got elected. He was actually really interested in this work, and so he's put together a series of policy roundtables around a specific issue where his staffer will go through and sort of figure out what to push and how with a variety of movement groups. I know that WFP is there. I know that we've been there. I know that a variety of social justice oriented groups, 1PA, 215 People's Alliance, in the city have been thinking this through. But there hasn't been a coherent sort of one-stop shop entity that we've all sort of realized that over the course of working through this and over the course of this past legislative session. So what we've sort of been realizing is, we've been talking to each other one-off about these things. We've worked with my state rep Rick Krajewski on various bills. We've worked with Elizabeth Fiedler over in the southern part of the city, on a couple of things. But what we really need is a place to come together and, not just work on one issue or another issue, but A, think about all of the issues at once, and B, also, sort of conceive of ourselves as one unit. So what I'll say to your question is, we are trying to pull together the coalition now, but we've just realized that we needed one in a formal sense. And so, hopefully SIO is going to be that. We can talk a little bit about how that's developed over the course of reaching out to the elected officials. But, hopefully we are going to have that coalitional space where we can strategize, where we can think through what it means to be a socialist in office. But it really does have to be approached with intention, and it does have to be proactive. So I'll end there, but I'll also append on, the really interesting thing about it was we expected our elected officials to be a lot more leery about it. But in fact, when we first asked, they were ecstatic, and we were like, why hasn't somebody asked me about this before? This is wonderful. I would love to do it. Because I think both, there was that felt need for a coalition and for a coordinating space, but also maybe our elected officials can respond to this. It can be pretty lonely being a lefty in our case, majority Republican bodies, but I would imagine even with, progressives and liberals as well.
Thank you so much, Mike D. Would love to get your thoughts on this too, Genevieve, in terms of some of the tactics that you've seen work well, or, just insights on that in the coalition work that you've done in partnership with elected leaders in Ithaca, especially around some of the housing struggles that you name around like cancel rent, tenants' rights. Like what has been your experience with some of that coalition building?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about sort of two kinds of coalitions. One is your outside coalition and one is your inside coalition. And I mean like your coalition inside the legislature. I'm going to start with outside because who I'm talking to here, like there are 133 people in this room. Some of you have really developed DSA chapters in your cities. Some of you don't. That's the second group, is who I'm talking to, where I'm assuming you don't have the infrastructure for DSA alone to like create and manage this process. And so you're going to need to build an outside coalition before you get started on building an inside one. And in order to do that, like there's a quote that runs through my head on a basically daily basis from Cornell West, which is an unorganized socialist is a contradiction in terms. And so like, if you have politics that you want to enact in the place that you live, you need to organize. And that's not like, it can be organizing when you talk to people who already agree with you, but like the real organizing is talking to people who don't agree with you. And so a strong outside coalition is going to bring together different groups with different political theories and different strengths in their operation. So like ours is like, we have like the Working Families Party, we have the DSA, we have the Ithaca Tenants Union, we now have like for doing turnout for a bunch of things, like the local like Starbucks union, who we love. And like all of these different groups have different strengths. The tenants union does a lot of like direct service work on a continuous basis that has nothing to do with election or policy cycles. The WFP is more of an electoral specific thing, like, and not an endorsement of a specific party. I'm just saying that's what they do. And so like, if you're, one of my biggest pieces of advice is find a coalition member who is going to bottom line that electoral infrastructure. And if that can be DSA and you have that capacity, that's great. If not, find a partner, even if they're not aligned on every single issue all of the time. And in building like that coalition, recognize that you all have different strengths, like find the points that you align on. And ultimately that's not always, you're not going to share all of the same like politics or like priorities, but I don't know. I think one of the reasons that all of us in this room like identify as socialists is because we recognize that the value of like solidarity with people who you don't necessarily agree with or don't even necessarily know is the most important value that you can possibly have, like if we want to change the world for the better. And that it sounds kind of corny, but like figuring out how to like love and respect each other and stand in solidarity with each other, even if you have differences, is I really mean this. I think the single biggest task of trying to start like a new operation in the place that you live. And I'm sure like all of us can think of some group or person or whatever that we've had like a beef with at the individual or organizational level. Like every once in a while, step back, like analyze that and understand, is this making us more organized or like less organized? Inside coalition, other legislators. This is it's a little bit of a different thing. Some of the same principles apply, but like we talked about how we're coming into these legislatures as a minority, like legislatively, often like political ideology wise. And so the legislators, and like huge shout out to Jorge for this, and I'm sure anyone else who's a legislator on here, you're not just having organizers outside, like that same quote of an unorganized socialist being a contradiction in terms, that applies to the people you have inside too. And that's not just organizing with your coalition and like what keeps them accountable. We're always like struggling with this question of a candidate accountability. I said earlier that like the number one priority in building a coalition to do a project like this is someone who can bottom line the electoral work, because that is your accountability mechanism. It's not like the candidate being a really good person. It's the fact that you have the coalitional operation that keeps them in office. And as they act in ways that like upset capitalists and like they lose the access to the things that can get capitalists elected, you can stand beneath them and keep them elected over and over and over again. But when they're going inside, they need to be an organizer too. So like picking a good candidate and somebody who like ideally comes from DSA, comes from your organizing, maybe if you have a tenants union or something like that, who has shown that they are like naturally an organizer. That is the only way you're going to pass anything from a minority position, because like what Jorge has to do is he has to organize all of his colleagues from all different points on the political spectrum to do anything of any kind in his legislature. And that is not a task that every single person is up for. And so like just sitting with that and recognizing that you have to be an organizer with all of these other groups on the outside. Your electeds also have to be organizers with their colleagues on the inside. Sometimes you're going to have to organize their districts, et cetera, et cetera. Like, just meditate on the fact that it is all like an organizer mindset, and that if you're not organizing, you're not doing socialism.
All right, all the snaps fingers to that, Genevieve. One of the things that you raised again is, you know, and I'm going to pose this to the electeds on the call, and also Mike, you raised this too, in terms of, and I wish there was a way to cue that Akon song of "I am so lonely." Like when you mentioned it's literally a lonely experience of like you're going, and I named this as, you know, as socialists. If you're going in as a socialist and a leftist into any type of political apparatus, you are inherently signing up for a mission of political warfare. You are going up against the political machinery that capitalist folks use to oppress, repress working class people, to silence them, and to strip them of everything that they need on a material basis, to diminish those things. So you're going in, if you're one of the, you know, special people that's like, yes, I like people, I hate capitalists, screw you, Elon, and whoever Amazon guy, ball guy. Like, I hate all of y'all, but I want to go and run for office and represent working class people there, knowing that there's going to be an onslaught of just psychological and political warfare that I have to deal with every single day. And as you named, Genevieve, in the midst of all of that, have to somehow build a united coalition amongst my colleagues who might say or do the most off the wall type things to show that they really hate working class people and poor people. I gotta do all that somehow, and I think I want to do this job. So I would love to hear from one of the electeds. Actually, you know, I'm gonna pick on you, Councilmember Chavez, around this of how you've been able, especially as we're coming out of the budget season. I think you have some really great things to share around how you built a united front amongst colleagues that we know do and say the most trifling things, and we're able to like advance some wins. But also one of the things that I've admired about your time in office too is, and I would say this amongst the socialists, you know, three of us, we've taken to task what Genevieve and Mike have emphasized, proactively holding ourselves accountable to the movements and the demands that they lay in front of our feet, that they, you know, organized us to get elected into these positions. Like, I would love to hear in the 11 months that you have officially, 12 months, my bad, y'all, let me not short you, how that experience has been for you, Councilmember Chavez.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Wansley. Can you repeat I think you asked two questions.
Sorry, yes. So first question, yes. In terms of what it's been like dealing with being, and I think you already addressed this, like the minority, but like dealing with the how you've been able to build a united front around working class issues. And I just named an example of like, if you want to use the budget. The second one is how you've also proactively done this work of building and holding yourself accountable to your community members and the social movements in our city around the demands that they've also asked you to carry forward.
Yeah, no, thank you, Councilmember. I think one thing that we've been doing really good at City Hall, at least the socialists at City Hall, has been hearing the needs of community members. And one thing that we like to do is turn those cries for help, those ideas, those protests into policy or amendments. So if we hear that there's concerns with stuff and we have the same concerns, we will literally work on policy or amendments to try to shift the powers that be to make sure that doesn't happen, right? To make sure that we actually have a different way forward in the city of Minneapolis and, hopefully across the nation. I gave an example earlier. There was a rent control policy work group. The city of Minneapolis voted to allow the city council to vote on rent control. And there was this work group that was going to come before the council, and the three socialists came up with a whole bunch of amendments. And we thought these amendments were going to be very hard to get them passed, but we were able to change that work group tremendously. Like, that work group changed, and it was something that, one, we were able to support, while we still have our own, our own concerns about that work group and what work they're going to come out with. We were able to organize it really heavily to change that rent control work group. There's this big office in City Hall. It's the Office of Performance and Innovation that has been under attack all year long for, I would say, it's a big political fight inside City Hall. And that department was going to be cut in the new government structure. And in the new government structure process, we were able to, again, the socialists were able to come back and make a whole bunch of amendments. And we were able to save that department and, make sure that we can do things differently. Just this week, we were able to bring a whole bunch of amendments to our legislative agenda. And in this budget process, there was 30 amendments. So there's 13 council members in Minneapolis. 3 of the council members are from the Democratic Socialists, from Twin Cities DSA. And there was 30 amendments, and then 20 of those amendments, so 20 out of 30, 66% of those amendments were from the socialists, because we know that the budget that was presented to us was not going to serve our constituents. It doesn't represent our constituents. It isn't going to change the lives of our constituents. And I would say that 17 out of the 20 amendments passed on this body, and it was talking about, green jobs, helping employ unhoused neighbors to get employment. It was, making sure, Councilmember Walensky passed a $1.5 million amendment to make sure there was fire suppression, to make sure that these buildings and public housings aren't burning down. And we were able to make all these big changes because we heard the voices of our constituents. And it still wasn't enough, right? It still isn't where we need to go, but it showed that we are able to organize. People can organize outside of City Hall, and we're going to hear those voices, and we're going to take that fight into City Hall to make sure that those voices aren't being left off the table. And I think that has been the beautiful part about all this. And understanding that it's still not enough, and that we need to continue to keep on fighting, and we need to continue on organizing until we actually have a government that actually cares about all our residents in Minneapolis. And we'll get there, and we're not there right now. And I'll say that out loud multiple times. I scream it out my chest every single day that we are in a government system that doesn't care about working people. But we're going to get there one day, and it's about fighting back and bringing and giving hope to the people here and elsewhere. So I hope that helps explain a little bit.
Oh, you did, Comrade Chavez. I feel like you need a red beret after that. Legit. When you talked about, basically the governments and just the political environments that we're all inhabiting and organizing, we know we're facing, we know who we're there to represent. We're there to build power amongst the working class. And there's no reason why we should expect the upholders of the status quo, the mayors, the city managers, corporate developers, all those part of the ruling class, the police, their bodyguards, that they're just going to sit back and just allow us to do these things. That if they did, we wouldn't be here today, and life would be all to the good. But I do want to know in this next question, I want to pass this actually to Jorge, Councilmember Jorge, to get your thoughts on this. All of the things that you all are naming and what you're doing also in your work is putting pressure on the status quo, particularly in your local government and in your city. And we know the interests of the business lobbyists and the capitalist class. They're not happy about this. And this is why they do different maneuvers. Let's try city manager instead, all these things to try to figure out how to silence working class people, to create confusion amongst decision-making processes, all that, so that working class people never really think they got the power that we know they have. So I'm interested in getting your thoughts of, what is some of the pushback you've seen? I think it's also important that we name as socialists the ways in which the ruling class, what's their playbook? Like, how are there also galvanizing tactics to constantly put us in our place, either as insurgent socialists who dare to go into office, or even as organizers that's like, or getting renters in our buildings to like call out a ratchet slumlord. So would love to hear, some of the specific ways in which you've seen the empire strike back in your experience as an alderperson, and in the community that you organize with.
Most definitely. The empire is striking back, and they're striking back because they are afraid of what we represent. One of the things that is very interesting here in Ithaca, I mentioned that that labor is on the rise here in Ithaca, and that's happening in a very interesting way because we have had our traditional trade unions and our public sector unions that have been here for quite some time, and they've been very well established and prominent. But similar to how the Common Council was prior to my entry into it, they're old boys clubs. They're for old white men who have made it to the middle class and who do labor, who do toil, no doubt, but they enjoy a level of comfort from the gains that their unions have made. And militancy hasn't been, retained. And an excellent example of how we receive pushback in the realm of like public safety and trying to reimagine. We are currently trying to reimagine public safety here in Ithaca, and I've been a staunch, supporter of reallocating department funds for the police in Ithaca, which is the largest funding sector in our city, towards more social services and proactive responses to public safety that prevent crime from happening, as opposed to reacting with militancy. And that puts us in odds with the police union. And one of the trickiest and most clever moves of capital and their protectors, which are the police, of the last couple decades, has been to convince the public that the police are laborers, and so the police union is often lumped in with the other unions in ways that make it very, very difficult to try and navigate trying to be pro unions. Because I've had folks who have been more conservative on our council, but who are very pro labor, and I'm doing police union, and I'm doing trying to do advocacy for Starbucks or whatnot, and then someone pulls me aside and they goes, Jorge, you do a lot of advocacy for the public sector unions and for Starbucks. Why don't you show the same sort of sympathies with the police union? And I'm almost taken aback. I'm like, well, because if any of these unions were doing a militant strike, it would be the police union sent to break up that strike. And so the idea of being called a union buster because we don't support filling our city with more police and more militarization, trying to outflank us on our left in a very tricky way is something that we have to sort of navigate and push back against. The other things that we sort of run into in terms of the empire striking back is, as I mentioned, we are currently working our way out of a very centralized power system that the mayor retains. And so the control, Ithaca only has two committees in our city. One of them is for city administration that deals with the budget, that deals with management of the city. And the other is planning economic development. This is the fund committee where we do a lot of housing and development sort of issues. And so the mayor has power in moving folks into committees and whatnot. And this recent council that was sworn in had, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Jen, I think like 4 WFP members. We're getting closer to a majority here. And 3 of those members are on the city administration committee. And only one of them is on the planning and economic development committee. And so that means you have all these progressives in city administration incapable of trying to advance progressive housing policy because they know that that's what the temperature is right now, and to avoid. So these are the institutional barriers to trying to do socialist organizing here, and that's what you have to overcome. And you do that by trying to stack your bench with socialists when you can, but when you can't do that, you have to get creative. And so maybe you have to member file legislation so that it bypasses committee. That might upset your more sensible progressive friends on council who like the rules and procedures, but it might not. And you might have to convince them that, like, if we really want to get stuff done, you have to recognize that these systems were not built with us in mind, and we are trying to change them to do that. So we might have to bend some rules, but that's how we get stuff done.
Yes, older person. Jorge, I love to hear it. I do want to allow space. Also, Mike would love to get your thoughts on like ways in which you've seen, some victories or opportunities also come out. Even in these moments when the status quo are pushing back from like a coalition and community organizer perspective. And after you, I want to note we're going to segue to the Q&A. And yes, so get your questions in. But yes, Mike.
Yeah, so I would say there's two really specific instances of the empire striking back on us, and they're actually in response to progressive victories. So, a little bit ago, Philadelphia elected one of the first reform DAs, Larry Krasner, in this recent wave of, declining to prosecute low-level offenses, attempting to achieve some amount of criminal justice reform through, declining to prosecute and sort of using the DA's discretion to not, to sort of throw yourself on the gears of the carceral system. To which the Republican majority in the state house has decided to interpret a law very sketchily to try and impeach him. From Harrisburg, hundreds of miles away, denying somebody who has been reelected 60-40, got elected pretty handily the first time, just saying people in Philadelphia don't deserve to elect their DA. It's sort of unclear where that's going to end up. I think they really thought it was their big election day thing, and that would, swing a bunch of districts for them, and it didn't turn out that way. The other thing is that Pennsylvania, on the state level, does not have any contribution limits in electoral campaigning whatsoever. And the richest man in the state, a guy named Jeffrey Yass, really does not like the idea of a public education system that's available to everybody. And so, yeah, Sean in the chat pointing out Jeffrey Yass. He's worth about $12 billion. And this past cycle in 2022, he spent $18 million on both sides of the aisle. He had a personal gubernatorial candidate who lost in the primary, who he spent about $6 million on. But also, any left of center representative, irrespective of party, in the Philadelphia metro got 2 or 3 just really vile mailers against them. And, probably mid 5 figures to low 6 figures to their primary opponent this cycle. So, the forces of capital are very well articulated here, is what I'll say. But I guess to respond to the part that you specifically called me out for, with all that in mind, and with a Republican majority until recently in both houses of the state legislature, there have actually been some victories. And in particular, I want to call out Nikhil Saval's recent win, where he built a really broad coalition. So in addition to sort of building the united front from the past question, he engaged in a little bit of divide and conquer, where he got a lot of Republican votes from rural areas of the state for $100 million in the state budget. I think it's 125 for people to be able to repair their homes. And, he did that for, economic justice reasons. Obviously, there are a lot of people who own homes, but are working class and, are struggling to maintain them. There's a Green New Deal angle in that, repairing homes makes them more ecologically efficient. You spend less energy heating and cooling. But what he did was he really, he is an organizer by training. He was a Unite Here organizer, among other things, before he got elected. And he really just had a very disciplined schedule of one-on-ones where he just laid out very clearly to a lot of these representatives how it was in the interest of their district, because those districts are facing economic crisis just as surely as Philadelphia, what it meant for their district for people to be able to repair their homes. And it ended up getting in the budget. It wasn't by acclamation. It wasn't, everybody celebrated whole home repair, But he was able to build sort of this very broad majority coalition in the legislative chamber, which I found tremendously impressive. I was certainly saying, oh, that isn't going to happen, right up until the point where it got in. So I would say, there's a lot of challenges here, especially in a purple state, especially in a place without really campaign finance law. But nevertheless, through good organizing, victories are still very much possible.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mike. So I'm going to hop on to some of the questions that were submitted. The first one is around, and someone, Mike, you touched on this, but it's more so around electoral organizing. And I think we hear this a lot around DSA, especially of like where we've shown to have wielded some really substantial power in the electoral arena and moving forward a socialist agenda. But yes, how do you balance this project of like building electoral power and also knowing that I guess also change happens outside of like the political systems that you all name, especially governments, are not designed with working class people in mind. So would love to get maybe Genevieve's thoughts initially, and then anyone else who wants to like hurry up and get that.
Sorry, I was responding to one of the Q&A questions. I didn't hear the first part of your question, so I'm going to pass it to someone else. I've talked a lot anyway. I'll go second.
Anyone wants to?
Jorge said in the chat that he can take it.
Go for it, Jorge.
Yeah, no, I definitely hear this. And there's a lot of conversation about people even like asking the question, should we engage, in electoralism? It's reformist, you get co-opted into the system, et cetera, et cetera. And for me, I always understand my role as an elected, a socialist in office is as a movement candidate. And so my job when I'm in council, right now I'm in the minority, my job is to agitate until we can build out more of a coalition and more of a majority and pass these things, but it's to agitate on behalf of, the priorities of our coalition, of our movement, DSA, the Working Families Party, the Tenant Union, et cetera, et cetera. And so an example of this is Ithaca was one of the first cities, was the first city in the country to have all of its Starbucks unionized, which is really awesome. And they hit us with really hard union busing tactics. They closed down one of the stores in our city, in my ward in particular. So I spent a lot of my winter on quite a few picket lines, and doing a whole lot of agitating. And I brought forward a resolution to City Council to call on the NLRB to look into this case and recognize this as union busting, and to step in and rectify the situation. And the NLRB did, and that is something I'd like to attribute to not just to myself, but to all the folks who helped in agitating that and forming that as sort of providing the North Star, I will say, to which I was moving towards. And so for me, first part of my time in council was based on supporting and giving solidarity to our budding labor movement. And so that's what I was focused on. The other part of that is our chapter in Ithaca has a priority campaign of free and expanded transit here in the city, free CAT as we call it, because our bus system is called the TCAT. And so it's my job to get in there and agitate, since I don't have the majority to do anything right now, towards normalizing that our university, Cornell, that has a multi-billion-dollar endowment, needs to pay its fair share and then some, because they pay $0 in taxes, and pay their share and make the service free for everybody, because 75% of the folks who use the bus are Cornell affiliated. And so when I get into council, I'm trying to push that, we bring Cornell to the negotiating table and play hardball with them and not be afraid to rock that boat, and call their bluff. to work with folks who might be more conservative or more liberal, but who think, yeah, Cornell isn't paying their fair share. And so let's agitate together about that. And let's talk about, and then working with folks like the Social Democrats and progressives who have like ideas for specific legal policies or approaches to doing that, that we can find something that we can get a mass mobilization to move towards and to provide a strategy with. And so I'm functioning on council with the sort of objectives and the missions that my chapter and my movement give me. And that's what I'm doing. They have an outside ground game and I have an inside ground game. And that's what I'm focused on doing. And they provide the North Star for me to move towards and organize around.
Love that. Thank you so much, Jorge. Genevieve, you also want to
Yeah.
add some thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to take a way more like zoomed out perspective, not like going into specific examples, but like, so this question of like dealing with the tension between entering like the state, the United States government, which is like a capitalist, white supremacist, like imperial institution that has wrought evil across the entire globe, to use that structure to like try to improve the lives of yourself and the people around you, is a contradictory task, like in and of itself. And yet it is like, what brings us to do it is a belief that like socialists having like the state is the mechanism by which we organize the power to like change society. And so we have no choice as socialists but to use the state. And I don't think it's exclusively the state. Like building these like dual power institutions is also important. But for all of us here who are interested in this idea of entering the state, we have to go into that and like organize our comrades who are like supporting us in that project, recognizing that this is a contradictory position and it's going to involve a lot of tension. And it's very easy to get obsessed with that and like micro examine every decision that gets made by each elected and like, how'd they vote on this thing? How'd they vote on this thing? Like, are they representing socialism here? Are they capitulating to capitalists here? Like, my recommendation for how to deal with this is to like have a vision of the future that you want to build, and recognize that the position that we're in right now, like societally in the United States, is a chapter of history that like is in the books before we get there. Because there's this chapter of history that's been for the last several decades where a lot of like socialists at the institutional and personal level had to like go underground and not organize and not be open about what they believed. Like from, you know, mid 2010s onward, there has been this massive resurgence and this room created in our culture for us to be open about what we believe, to organize with each other, to start winning things and demonstrating that like we are optimizing for meeting social human needs and not for private profit. And so like in the history book, like as this new chapter has been starting, like what's the story there going to be? Is it that we just looked at right where we are right now and like hyper examined ourselves and like we're obsessed with this tension at all times to the point that we got obsessed with disagreements and like fractured apart? Because that is how that chapter has gone at various points in our history and in the history of other countries. And so like looking at the very big long-term picture, like it helps me a lot to think about what story do we want to tell? What is the version of this chapter of history where socialists continue to increase in power and presence in society? And like, not just power for the individual people in office, but power for the organizing that we do through DSA and other organizations. And like, think in that direction beyond the individual squabbles and votes and so on.
Thank you for naming that. And this kind of follow-up question that came from our audience, I think segues so nicely in terms of one, interpersonal skills, and also like one that I think continues to be a major challenge and tension that actually Genevieve you just named of the left or leftist movements in the US, of how do we handle disagreements? How do we respond when there are moments where politically we are not aligned? And even Mike, you named that like the task of a socialist is to build or support broad coalitions of working class people who ideologies and positionalities might be contradictory to one another. But what is the glue between all of us is like y'all, we all poor. Like literally, if, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos really are like, look, we just gonna fly up off this planet. We're all assed out, like all the way. That is the glue that bonds us. And just thinking of, in moments of that, when we're facing tensions, either as an elected official who are taking votes, or a community partner where you're trying to move your elected leaders, like what are some of the ways in which you've handled those political disagreements and still move the work forward? And I think that's just a basic skill set that we struggle with on the left. Like, it's okay to have disagreements. We ain't gotta be best friends. And we should have spaces where we can have those debates out. But like, what has that looked like for y'all? Like some tangible examples. And I'm gonna actually pick on you again, Councilmember Chavez, and then segue to you, Mike, if you have some examples to offer too.
I can make mine really quick. I think I can give one example. I think at the beginning of the year, there was a vote I took that I actually do regret taking right now, and probably the only vote I've ever regretted taking on this council. And then there was folks from DSA that had a conversation with me and asked me my analysis. At the moment, the vote I took was for a specific reason. I just thought I'd rather not privatize public safety. And that was what my opinion was at the moment. And after just more conversations with my constituents, I was like, you know what, at the end of the day, it's not even about the vote. Sometimes it's about your values. And you don't have to choose between two bad things. You can just choose and stick with your values. And ultimately, I know that same vote is going to come on this council tomorrow. And we're trying to figure out how to end that program in the city of Minneapolis through a directive that a different colleague of ours is here. So I think the grace of having a conversation, hey, council member, why did you vote this way? Especially like within Twin Cities DSA that sat down with me. And at the moment, I felt like I made the right decision. And then as the days progressed, I was like, sometimes you can just vote your values and not have to choose between two horrible things that ultimately are going to come up. And I think that's one thing that really helped. I think one other part where I'm still struggling with, there's the situation, there's this big polluting project that is coming down my backyard in my ward, and the votes have never been there in the council to pass this amazing community-led project. And for the first time ever, we brought this project back up. So I led the effort this year in January, and the vote took in March, where we stopped the polluting project and we passed basically a $14 million project that would do this community investment in our ward, and it got vetoed. So then the project got vetoed, we tried to overturn it, we failed to overturn it. And then I had to make a decision if I was just gonna sit there and let this project continue to come down in the backyard, or if I was gonna have to find a compromise, because at that point, the project is gonna come back our backyard anyways, because we no longer, we weren't able to overturn the veto. So the project is approved. And that has been a very difficult part, I think, of my year of trying to figure out the tension with you don't have the votes to do it anymore. You had it, you got vetoed. What is your strategy moving forward in the internal game without trying to ruin every single relationship that you've been building inside City Hall, and then trying to keep the community vision at the forefront? So that has been something that I'm still struggling with after the veto, it's hard to keep on pushing when the votes aren't there anymore. So that's something that I'm still trying to, figure out. And that's a vision that I'm still working with the community. We're still not done yet. We're still fighting back. We're still trying to find a place where we can all find agreement. But ultimately, that has still been a challenge of me trying to figure out. So if anybody in the audience is hearing, if you have advice, I'm all ears, and making sure we can move community vision forward, even when there's obstacles, even when there's vetoes, even when there's people in power that don't want it to happen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I'll start by saying I don't have a good answer. And I think it's, I think it's really one of the big problems facing the left that we have to figure out in the next few years. I think you can really sort of view the 2016 to 2022 period as, hey, we're back. There's a socialist left again. We're out, we're doing things, we're winning all these primaries. And now we're in sort of a period of consolidation and figuring out what to actually do. One thing that I will say, though, is that I don't think this necessarily solves the problem. But one of the things I've really noticed in these big high-profile controversies that you'll see where someone who's been endorsed by DSA takes a bad vote, or what could be perceived as a bad vote with, a certain perspective on the available information, is that there's a lack of communication, and it comes to people as a surprise, right? It's, oh, I wasn't aware of this until 3 seconds ago, and then all of a sudden this vote happened, and all of a sudden it's, the way I don't like, and so I'm surprised, I'm confused, and I'm angry, and I'm hurt. And so I think building up these institutions of, coalition spaces that are communicative, I think building up places where we can talk through how legislators are, looking towards certain votes over the course of the legislative session, really just having these communicative relationships, right, where people understand where everybody's coming from, people have time to talk these things over when they happen, because some of these votes are surprises, some of these things are sudden developments, somebody puts forward an amendment or whatever, but frequently you'll have a vague sense of the legislative calendar ahead of you and what big votes are going to be. The more we can talk these things through as sort of an in-group beforehand, even if it's purely informational, even if there's still disagreement at the end of it, the more time we have to do that beforehand, I think the lower temperature a lot of these will be. So that's sort of the incremental step that I think might be helpful, and one of the things that I'm trying to put together here in Philly.
And one thing, no one has to respond to this too, but just thinking of, and Councilmember Chavez, you mentioned this, of all of us are part of DSA, I think, and one of the most critical pieces of any socialist organization, I think, in the US has been having infrastructure and a culture that supports debate. I think so much of the left, we shy away from conflict, like literally scared out here, like, oh God, like, no, conflict is part of life. Like, we're literally talking about confronting racial capitalism and abolishing it, daring to do that. That's a struggle, working class struggle. Like, there's going to be conflict along the way. And it's like, how are we creating the spaces to be able to, one, acknowledge those moments of disagreements and tensions, to, as you mentioned, Mike, name it, not even with the goal of resolving it, but naming it. And having a container to do that. That could be forums. What I'm really grateful for, like Councilmember Chavez, you named, like in TCDSA, we have a grievance committee and a restorative justice committee that allows us to have a very centered discussion, even around political issues, in a way where it's just like, okay, y'all, like, we're not here to write you out, or quote unquote, like, normalize, like, you're about to be canceled right now because you took something or did something in this way that I don't agree with. So I think so much of this work too, as members and leaders, part of a leftist organization, is like how we also are creating a process for that conflict to happen, and how we respond to it in an adult way, not in a way that, like, we're all having adult temper tantrums, because that's no fun either. So I want to name, like, this is such an interpersonal skill that even I think as council members, we see literally adult temper tantrums from the mayor, our colleagues, all the time, where it's just like, are you really yelling right? Like, do you need a timeout? Like, literally, it's something that we're going to have to be able to really practice as we're building for a more vibrant and restorative future in our socialist society. All right, off my soapbox. Next question. Back to housing campaigns, like some of the work that many of you are doing around housing. Can you name some of the specific housing initiatives that you have been a part of, that you're actively a part of? I see here one is named like Empty Homes Fee. I will note, in Minneapolis, my office is absolutely exploring that. But like, looking at the ways, what are some of the tactical campaigns that you are using to deal with, we know this housing crisis that's happening all across the country. So would love to hear, Genevieve, you've done substantial work around this area. If you would like to share some of the work that you've been able to do around this.
Yeah, I am gonna try to keep it brief because I could go on for so long about this. But so I think that right now, in the abstract, like where we are culturally in America with how we relate to housing, is that like most people's, I think, largest expense is their housing. And like, as we've dealt with some really serious economic struggles in this country for now the past like 2 years, probably for more years too. More and more people are like seeing their housing as like the primary economic stressor that's on them. And as a result, are like, and in some cases, because of like past government interventions that we've been able to like achieve, like, eviction moratoriums, rental assistance, like things like that, people see housing as a site where the government can interact with their day-to-day lives. And so people are struggling and they see the government as a, entity that can do something for them that for the most part isn't doing anything for them. And, as is the status quo in this country, we like turn to private industry and we turn to like wealthy capitalists to put them in the positions of power over the problems we have in society. And in housing, they don't solve it because it's incredibly, incredibly profitable for them. In a lot of ways, like this country is like 3 big real estate corporations in a trench coat. And so like landlords and in the sort of like established powers in the government have been in the driver's seat to like solve a lot and are in the driver's seat to solve a lot of these problems, and they're not doing it. But the things that have like measurably helped people, especially the eviction moratoriums, and some newer things that are happening, like empty homes taxes in some places, new opting into like rent stabilization, whether at like the ballot measure level or through like opt-in programs. And this is happening all over the country. These campaigns are being led by socialists and by organized tenants who are like organized under a socialist ideology. Tenant organizing has been an axis of struggle for us for hundreds of years. And so like the landlord and like capitalist solutions are not working. The things that are helping people are the solutions that we're bringing forward. And that's an incredible opportunity for us. And so these like new rent stabilization measures that have passed in a ballot measure sense all over the country are really, really encouraging that like actually the state steps in to limit rental price increases, which is like, what a lot of people just like very directly want. It's not some big means tested, you have to fill out a long application or whatever. It's just like we're controlling the market. And like, so that's something that I've been like tangential to in New York recently. In one of our cities, we just opted into like a rent stabilization program that we have. DSA and like allies organized people to get on the rent guidelines board, which is the entity that decides how much rent changes year to year, and organized really good and got really good people on that, and had a lot of hustle in outnumbering the landlords at the first hearings by 10-1 with like tenant organizing. And the result is that the board decided on a 15% rent reduction for its first decision. And then landlords sued the city. And as the saying is in America, you can sue the Pope for paternity. It doesn't have to be like legitimate. And so now a court has like suspended this decision, and that can be demoralizing in a lot of ways. But the fact that we're going up again, and like we're particularly primed right now to say, hey, conservative courts shutting down laws that protect people really sucks. Like, and the mainstream, center left like Democrats are also on the same page with abortion. And so like, and also the right only got to the point of overturning abortion stuff because of years and years and years of passing laws at the local level that got challenged in courts. Most of them got overturned, but they only had to win once in a while to like advance forward. So we're doing that. We've also at the local level in New York, many cities, not Ithaca, long story there, we've tried and we're about to try again in 2023, have opted into good cause tenant protections, which is essentially like, it's not like, yeah, there's lots of tenant protections of various kinds. What good cause is it says a landlord has to have a reason that they can prove in court to evict a tenant. Seems obvious, isn't the case in a lot of places. What this does is it gives tenants a right to have their landlord not like them, but stay in their house anyway, which is a right to organize as tenants, in the same way that when you unionize at a workplace, the first thing you get in a contract is just cause employment. And so like there's in all of these like things that we identify, good cause, rent stabilization, where you set up a rent guidelines board, that's a thing that you organize to do. Good cause is a right to organize. All of these like priorities, are solving problems in ways that like capitalists and landlords never have been able to, and B, are giving us new avenues and targets to organize that we can then like use to stack our movement. That's what I'm most excited about in the housing world right now. And I guess looking on the horizon, what we're starting to get ready for and starting to develop that isn't really going to take off, I think, for a couple years, is new social housing authorities in several states, which is, we are saying like, look how much this private market is failing to meet the needs of the American people. We are going to create like public socialized options that like fix the failings of the institutions that we tried to build 100 years ago. And we're going to build housing that's not run for profit. It's like governed by residents, like et cetera, and have this platform to like actually like enact our ideology in real life, because people, including legislators, are so fed up with the fact that these problems keep getting worse and the private market isn't solving them.
So if you have never considered this, Genevieve, dissertation, like TED Talk, like legit, just on housing alone right there. I know we got probably time for one more question, and like, thank you so much for our attendees for hanging in. We're still like 100 strong in here, and that's amazing, especially on a Wednesday evening. So, you know, just to capture that, I'm gonna throw a question towards y'all to answer in the chat box. We know capitalist people don't want us to have nice things. What is one nice thing you're excited about for our lit socialist future? Like one nice thing that you know we're definitely going to enjoy. I'm just going to name my dirty pleasure on this one is Fenty. I'm already letting y'all know when we get rid of capitalism, I'm absolutely going to be out here capping for Rihanna and her baby, because I also believe in socialism. We can still have a nice beat face. And we ain't got to have the makeup with child labor and exploited labor made, but I still want me some Fenty lip gloss. So I'm just going to say Fenty lip gloss and Fenty makeup is something that I'm really excited about and having in the socialist future. That said, one of our last questions that we had was actually around public education, which I'm really excited to see this question, knowing in Minneapolis, one of the very first labor struggles that like popped off in our first month and a half, Councilmember Chavez, was the Minneapolis teachers went on strike, which hadn't happened in 50 years. And they went on strike for a historic 3 weeks. And it was just like amazing to be able to link City Hall, which has been dismissive of public education, really having that also be an extension of the fight that educators were leading outside of City Hall. But we'll love to hear, Councilmember Chavez, like if you have some thoughts on the ways in which socialists can play a role in really advancing the struggle around public education. Also, I'll leave it to any other, the Councilmember Jorge, any thoughts you might have on that too.
I mean, yeah, thank you, Councilman Wansley. There was a historic, some historic stuff happened back in March, and you saw teachers striking for their students, for better wages, and for better workers' protections and rights in our school systems. And you saw a lot of people that were really silent during this strike. You saw a lot of people not say anything, stay on the sidelines, didn't even show support for our teachers. And we know that our teachers are the ones that have helped us get to where we are today. And one thing that was really powerful is that we saw our socialists actually push that agenda forward. I know that at least the 3 socialists on Minneapolis City Hall, we were on the picket line every single day. And our friends in Twin Cities DSA were on the picket lines every single day until we had a tentative deal that was better for the teachers, And every single day, it felt like it wasn't going to happen, right? Like the powers that be made it feel like this strike was not going to get anywhere. But because people showed up and because we cared about our teachers, we were able to push that needle. So I think that one thing that's really important is to never cross that picket line and to always show up to that picket line, right? We were there every single day. Like I woke up and went there in my ward all over because I knew that like my teachers, my residents, people I grew up with were fighting for their lives, and that the money that they were being paid wasn't enough. And that's one thing. I know Councilor Wansley led the city council in passing a resolution in support of our teachers. And there was pushback on her even doing that, but it was unanimous. And it showed our teachers that the city council of Minneapolis stood with our teachers. And I remember after we passed this big project in my ward, a whole bunch of teachers came out of City Hall and it was just full. And all of us showed up and we're like, you know what? We're gonna come up here and support our teachers because they matter. So I think that's one thing that's important. I know the city council of Minneapolis doesn't necessarily get to direct like the funds to the Minneapolis public school systems, but we've been able to do a couple of things that we've been funding in this budget, in like supporting our school-based clinics, supporting like, I think there's ways that we can use the city budget to actually invest dollars into our school system, even if that's not necessarily our jurisdiction. But it should be, because the investing in our kids is really important, and investing in their futures is what matters at the end of the day. So I think there's ways that the city council here, or some city council members in Minneapolis, were able to like push that needle and show that like, if you're an elected official, you need to be out there supporting our teachers, even if people are telling you not to do that because it's not the right thing to do. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Chavez. And you're right, we were out there every single day, and it was cold, y'all. Like cold. I mean, Minnesota is cold. I don't know about Ithaca and Philly. It was cold here, but the teachers made it warm. But our last question, we're approaching, sadly, our closing time together. But last question that all the panelists, we're going to do a rapid fire response to, just reflecting on your own experience so far. What are some quick nuggets of advice you would give to other DSA chapters or local organizers that are thinking about organizing, governing coalitions, and really doing this project of making socialists happen in their respective cities and communities, and their building? I want to name that, in your workplaces, in your faith communities. Like, it can start in the most immediate places where you inhabit. So we'll love to get your lasting the nuggets, the McDonald's nuggets of advice for our attendees on how they can start to do this work. I'm going to kick it off with Alder Person Jorge, for your response.
Yeah, I think the advice I would give is do an assessment and observe what exactly what niche do you and your cohort fill. Are you guys great door knockers? Are you guys unmatched in comms? Are you guys excellent fundraisers? Do you guys have a lot of electoral know-how? What is your niche, and how can you utilize that to the best interest of your abilities? Maybe you need to make those relationships and those inroads before you can take on a citywide election, but maybe not. And find out what your niche is, and then that's going to tell you what you're lacking and how you can find those folks to make those relationships. And really build that coalition that's going to win on all fronts, the ground game on the outside and the inside. So find your niche and find out what you're missing, who has it, and how you can build those relationships.
Ooh, rapid fire. All right. Thank you, Jorge. You set the bar. Genevieve, you're next.
Yeah. So my advice is to institutionalize your organizing and your politics. A lot of us, like movement wide, have been really politicized in the last 5 to 10 years, whether it's by elected fascism, whether it's by a national confrontation of white supremacy, whether it's by just the markets going all over the place and leaving us with very little money. We've all been super, super politicized as socialists across the country these past few years. And that swell of energy is great, even though it's come under shitty circumstances. But if we're gonna build the chapter of history right now that's going to lead to the next chapter that we want, we need to institutionalize that right now. Getting into the government at the local level is a way to institutionalize your local organizing, to give you goals to organize towards every couple of years, to give you a path to get in the local paper, basically whenever you want to get in the local paper. This opportunity should not be ignored. And in most cities, you could probably win one person if you have a DSA chapter there.
All right then. Councilmember Chavez, you're on next.
I'll make it quick. I just think about like building a municipal DSA agenda, like localities, building that up with their members, and then figuring out how they're going to get it accomplished, whether it's just on the ground organizing through the people or organizing people to make sure that the elected officials actually get on board on people's agenda. I think that is something that I love. I oftentimes see that kind of work being done outside of localities or municipalities. They see it at the state level, at the federal government level, but I think we can get a lot done at the municipal level and building up an agenda in your local DSA chapter and bringing folks in and moving that people's agenda is something that can be really helpful.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Mike.
Yeah. I'll sort of offer one that's inappropriately mundane and then one that's like too big. The first one is you would be so surprised how far you can get by simply being the first person to have a conversation with somebody and being the only person to follow up from that conversation. So much of organizing, both institutionally, interpersonally, and out in the real world, is just simply having the wherewithal to start a conversation and follow it up and keep it running. But then bigger than that, I really want to reemphasize what Genevieve said in terms of if your DSA chapter or if you are at large, like figure out, as Jorge said, your niche and absolutely do electoral work. If you haven't elected somebody to office, find a way to do that. If you have somebody who you've elected but you haven't talked to in a while, absolutely look them up. For all of the reasons Genevieve said, but also I think it's a really excellent piece of political education in that the biggest fights that are happening right now are happening through the state. They might not start there, they might not end there, but they're going through there. And so it just gives you a really fantastic perspective on how capital is operating and like clues you into where the fights are and what they need to be. So, if you take one thing away from any of this, it's do it.
I hate boosting capitalist slogans, but I'm not going to front when you said that. I just thought of Nike, just do it. That's probably messed up. But thank you so much for that, Mike. If audience members, if you can do the hand clap, emoji and just give our panelists a big round of applause for just their insights and just being really open and transparent about their experience and trying to do this project. I know many of you named this in so many ways. It's like often building the tracks, laying the tracks before you build the train, building the plane before you fly it or while you're flying. Like this whole socialist project, there is no roadmap to it, but you all are putting the pieces together and creating spaces for all of us to learn how we do this work together of building a socialist society. So I just want to say thank you. You all have given us so much to think about and really some really good nuggets on how we can build strong governing coalitions. Just for our audience members, just to let you know, be on the lookout for a follow-up email that's going to have the recording of tonight's discussion, as well as an outline of upcoming events that's going to happen in this particular DSA series of how we win. And also, there's going to be a donation link in that email too, so make sure to make a contribution. But most importantly, a socialist organization is just like a gym. We're only strong as like our active members. So there's going to be involvement opportunities listed in that follow-up email. Make sure you check them out and sign up for one, and really be part of this organized project of building a socialist society in future. But all that to say, again, I also want to thank all of our coordinators, our volunteers who helped put this event together. Again, our panelists, our co-sponsors, literally every single one of you who attended. We had upwards to 136 people here on a Wednesday night. Like, that's amazing. And I want to say thank you to everyone who's been working behind the scenes to keep this moving. David, Brandon West, James, Sunshine, Max, all from the Democratic Socialists of America Fund. Thank you so much for all the work that you've done to make tonight's possible. And again, be on the lookout for that follow-up email. And yes, thank you all again for joining us. And until the next time, peace, love, and let's keep fighting and getting wins for working class people. All right, y'all.